Eu acho que agora é para estar indo. Bom, então, bom dia todo mundo que está assistindo por aqui, né? Buenos dias, buongiorno, guten Tag, bonum diem vobis ex opto, né? Aí por aí vai. Nós aos poucos dando início às atividades do nosso terceiro Congresso Brasileiro Christian Wolff e 10º Simpósio do Núcleo de Filosofia Kantiana aqui da Universidade Estadual de Londrina. É um evento que, pelo andar da carruagem, já ficou tradicional. O do Kant, o do Wolff já está na terceira edição. É interessante porque, só de pensar que até então nunca havia acontecido um evento Wolff no Brasil, agora nós já temos 3 e com outros workshops, etc. Então, a situação bem profícua, bem assim, florescente, digamos, né? E agora a gente tem, então, a palestra da Luciana Martínez, que é investigadora na Universidade de Lisboa, é argentina, mas fala muito bem o português. E nós temos também o doutorando dela pela Universidade de Buenos Aires, que é o Felipe Montero. Eles vão apresentar em inglês, porque assim também é interessante, porque a gente tem bastantes palestrantes internacionais, até inclusive que estão aqui presencialmente, que vão apresentar hoje, amanhã, depois de amanhã. Então é bom porque assim a gente consegue ter essa troca, né? Porque o inglês, querendo ou não, é a língua franca, apesar de nós aqui sermos todos latinos e falarmos essas belas línguas neorromânicas como o espanhol, o italiano, o alemão não, o português, o catalão e por aí vai. Né? Bom, então, só para ler o título da apresentação deles, daí eu passo-lhes a palavra. Nós temos The Limits of the Analogy Between the Order of the Mathematical Series and the Order of the World in the Vernünftige Gedanken von den Absichten der natürlichen Dinge, Paragraph 9. Em bom português, seriam os limites da analogia entre a ordem da série matemática e a ordem do mundo nos pensamentos racionais, dos propósitos, ou sobre os propósitos, dos entes naturais ou das coisas naturais. Ding é uma palavra terrível para traduzir. Vamos ver se vocês vão ter alguma coisa a dizer sobre isso. Bom, passo a palavra para vocês. Agradeço muito pelo interesse, pela disponibilidade, por estarem aqui. A Luciana novamente, o Felipe pela primeira vez, esperemos que primeiro de muitas. Então, agora é com vocês.
Muito obrigada, Emanuel, e para nós é um prazer realmente ter a oportunidade de partilhar o trabalho que estamos a desenvolver junto com Felipe, de partilhar esse trabalho com vocês. E parabenizo você, Emanuel, pela organização desse congresso. Realmente o programa ficou incrível e é um grande prazer e uma honra para nós participar. Então, vou começar a leitura da nossa palestra. O título é o que você já leu, Introduction. The text that contains the passage we are going to analyze is entitled Rational Thoughts on the Ends, and the word here is Absichten, of Natural Things. And it was first published in Halle, in German, in 1724. The book has two main parts. The first part is entitled On the Ends of the World and of the Bodies of the World. The second part is entitled On the Ends of Particular Kinds of Things. In the first, so the first entitled, I repeat, On the Ends of the World and of the Bodies of the World, in this general part, we find 8 chapters. We are interested in the first 2. The first is entitled On the Ends of Natural Things in General, and the second is entitled On the Principal or Main End of the World, Hauptabsicht. Before these 8 chapters, the text includes a preface in which Wolff explains the relation between this text, the Absichten, and his metaphysics, or the Deutsche Metaphysik. Throughout the book on the Absichten, the references to the metaphysics are constant. In the metaphysics, the author had developed certain pieces of knowledge concerning God without explaining sufficiently how this world can be a mirror through which we may know something about the divine perfections. In the first section of the first chapter of the Absichten, Wolff introduces the notion of an end of nature by means of an analogy with ends in general. Here we are translating end as end, Absichten, Absicht. This is, I don't know if it is really good, but Wolf is not using the word Zweck, just Absichten. Just as ends in general, so Absichten in general, refer back to a rational and free being through which we can think of something that happens, in the same way, through natural ends, we cannot but think of what God would have intended of them in creating them. This is the first paragraph of Absichten in the first chapter. Moreover, elsewhere, that is in the Metaphysique, Wolf has proved that the principal end of creation, so the Hauptabsicht of creation, is the display of God's perfection. On that basis, we have obtained some profitable knowledge. At the beginning of the second chapter of the Absichten, this principal end of creation is taken up again, and it is in fact the very topic of the whole chapter. If God willed the world to be a display of his perfections, then it must be possible for us to recognize such perfections through the world. If that is so, the first question that arises, and which serves as the guiding thread for the passage we are interested in, is: how would it be possible to recognize from the world that God exists? This question is the title of the paragraph 9 of chapter 2 of the first section of the Absichten, which is the passage on which we shall dwell. That passage begins with the following remark: if the world were necessary, then we could not recognize from it that God exists. Wolf has, of course, already proved that the world is not necessary, so that its peculiar contingency will allow us to establish that the world is a kind of mirror that reflects its creator for us. Now, in order to justify the remark just discussed, so the remark that says, if the world were necessary, then we could not recognize from it that God exists. In order to justify this remark, Wolf introduces a reference to a mathematical example. In this paper, we shall address that reference. Feli, the floor is yours.
Yes. So first of all, we are going to talk about the systematic function of the analogy that we find in this paragraph 9. So the thesis discussed in section 9 of the book has a form of a conditional. It says, if the word were necessary, we could not recognize from it that God exists. That is, a word that is necessary does not allow us to infer that the ground of its reality lies in something different from it, in something else. The thesis we are going to discuss presupposes another one, which was already discussed in the German metaphysics, namely, the thesis according to which God is something different from the world, and from its elements, and from the soul. In Metaphysics, paragraph 945, in fact, Wolf had drawn two conclusions from his previous reasoning, which allow him to specify what it is that we call God. On the one hand, God is a being in which the ground of the existence of the world and of our soul is to be found. This is explained in the previous paragraphs of the Metaphysics. Moreover, in paragraph 945, Wolf explains that this ground is different from the soul and from the world. That is, it is another entity. In light of this way of considering God and of the aim of examining under what conditions the world could be a mirror of him, at the very beginning of the first chapter, Wolf presents the conditional judgment we have read, which says that if the world were necessary, then we could not recognize from it that God exists. In this conditional proposition, the antecedent is proposition A, which says the world is necessary. The consequent is proposition C, which says we cannot recognize from the world that God exists. The conditional proposition composed out of them is a starting point of the line of argument developed in paragraph 9 of chapter 2 of the first section of the Absichten, which we analyze here. In order to illustrate the link between the antecedent and the consequent in that proposition, Wolff introduces an analogy between the word and a mathematical series. As we said, the antecedent is a statement A, which says the word is necessary. The consequent is a statement C, which says we cannot recognize from the word that God exists. There are different deductive strategies for inferring the conditional proposition, the connection between the two. But Wolff first approaches it through a non-deductive inference, namely an analogy. This procedure does not prove the relation between A and C. Rather, it makes it intelligible. Wolff says, anyone who understands mathematics will grasp without effort that if the word were absolutely necessary, it could not be recognized from it that the word has arisen from something else. So what does the analogy compare the word with? With a mathematical series. In it, in that mathematical series, there is an order in which the numbers follow one another infinitely. From that series, however, we cannot infer that there is an author of the order, for the order is necessary and cannot be otherwise. The order can be known from the nature of numbers alone. In the thing itself, in the series, we can discover the ground of the order. There is no need to look for a ground outside the series. In the following two sections of this talk, we shall analyze the details of the analogy and its limitations. So let's talk about the analogy, about the series itself. In section 9, Wolff points out that however much order we may observe in the word, if that order is necessary, then we could not infer from it that there is someone who ordered the word. He also tells us that someone who understands mathematics will have no difficulty in grasping this. It is in this context that he appeals to an analogy between the word and a particular numerical series, namely what he calls the Leibniz series for the circle. So the Leibniz series makes it possible to calculate the value of pi over 4, which is a number that allows us to calculate the area of a circle. So basically what we must understand is that we have an irrational number, which is pi over 4, and what Leibniz offers us is a way of approximating that number through a sum that iterates infinitely, right? So the form of the series, which is not so important in this context, but is a series where numbers alternate their sign. So the first number is positive, the second number is negative, the third is positive, and so on. And we obtain the members by adding 2 to the denominator. So the first number is 1 over 1, that is 1. The next number is, we add 2 to the denominator, so we have 1/3. The following number is 1 over 5, and so we add 2 infinitely. And that gives us an approximation, when we continue that to the infinite, of pi over 4. So what is important is it is essential to the analogy that Wolff establishes that one can stop at any member of the series whatsoever and determine which member follows it and which member precedes it. For example, if we are given the number -1 over 11, we know that the next member will have 13 as its denominator, because we know that we have to add 2 to the denominator. And we know that it will be positive, because the sign alternates. So if we had -1 over 11, the next number is positive 1 over 13. Moreover, from the same formula, we can determine the position of each figure in the numerical series. Given any number, we can know what step in the series that number represents. This is important because it is here that the similarity between the word and the series lies. According to Wolff, in the word, each element determines the place of the next one, just as happens in the series. In the German Metaphysics, paragraph 544 and 545, we find that the word presents itself to us as a series of connected, ordered things. The word is defined as a series of mutable things that coexist or succeed one another, but which, taken as a whole, are connected with one another. That they are connected means that each of them contains the ground of the existence of the others, successively or simultaneously. For this reason, we can see a similarity, a likeness between the word and the mathematical series. So if the word, well, the similarity is, of course, that if each member of the mathematical series determines the other member. So if we know a member, we can know the following member. And so the same happens in the word according to Wolf, where each member of the word has a ground of the existence of the other members. So if the word resembles the series, necessity in the word could allow us to infer that no ground external to it is required, in the same way as we inferred earlier with respect to the series. But, as we shall see, the likeness has a limit. The word does not resemble the mathematical series completely, and for this reason, the analogy does not allow us to conclude about the word what we can conclude about the series. So let's talk about the limits of the analogy. Now, Wolf emphasizes an essential difference between this mathematical series and the series of the objects of the word. He points out that the mathematical series is absolutely necessary, that the order in it is intelligible from the very nature of the numbers, and that for this reason, there is no need to look for a sufficient reason for such an order outside the numerical series. The ground of the series, according to Wolf, is explained in section 105 of the volume on infinitesimal calculus of his book on mathematics. Although the demonstration is too complex to be presented here, the important thing to note is that, according to Wolf, the rule that produces the series is not arbitrary. It could not be otherwise. The study of the calculation of areas for the circle reveals the necessity of the series without reference to anything different from the circle itself. The word, by contrast, is contingent, that is, it does not contain in itself the ground of the order it exhibits. Now, for Wolf, the contingency of the word does not exclude the natural necessity of the events of the word. That kind of necessity allows us to know that it is not possible for those events not to occur. However, this kind of necessity is restricted to the essence of the word and does not reach its existence, so that it is compatible with the contingent character of the word as a whole. The numerical series makes it possible to establish a relation between the thesis of the necessity of something and the thesis according to which we cannot recognize the existence of God from it. The necessity of the series allows us to look within it for the ground of its elements, and it means that we do not have to go outside it in order to look for the ground of its necessity. In the same way, if the word were absolutely necessary, we could not recognize from it that God exists. That is, that there is a ground of the word which is external to it. Now, in the German metaphysics, Wolf has already explained that the word is not absolutely necessary. Let us recall the main elements of the line of argument that the philosopher developed in that text. In the first place, the word is defined as a series of things subject to change that coexist and succeed one another, but which, taken as a whole, are connected with one another. The connection among the things that constitute the word is one of ground. The relation of ground is defined as follows. A is a ground of P if A contains something from which it can be understood why B is. In other words, A is a cause of B. The causes of the things of the word are found in the word, and causality is a kind of connection that gives unity to the word. The actual connection of the things of the word, the way in which some are grounded in others, prevents the events of the word from being constituted otherwise than they are, and in this sense, we recognize a certain necessity in them. All events in the world are necessary insofar as they presuppose a certain connection of things such that they can attain existence. But we quickly notice that this necessity is conditional or hypothetical and not absolute. Although the actual connection of things does not allow the events to be otherwise, this does not imply that the contrary events or the negation of the actual events are impossible. Other events that do not occur and that would contradict the given events are just as possible as those that attain existence. What comes to exist in this world is what is grounded in the interconnection of the things that constitute this world. But what is merely possible in it could happen in another world. The events of the world, the things of the series that constitutes it, are hypothetically necessary. That is, necessary under the condition of the connection that constitutes this world. In an absolute sense, the world is contingent and could have been different. Its events occur because the world is. They are hypothetically necessary, but absolutely speaking, they are contingent. In this, they differ from the elements of the geometrical series, whose necessity is absolute. The analogy with the mathematical series allows us to understand that if the world with its elements were absolutely necessary, we could indeed not infer an external ground from it. But the analogy has a limit. The limit is given by a substantive difference between the objects compared, and that difference is crucial for the argument within which the analogy is inscribed. Within the framework of his metaphysics, Wolff distinguishes between natural necessity, which is a necessity that characterizes the world, and geometrical or metaphysical necessity. Since the world exhibits a merely hypothetical necessity, which means that it is ultimately contingent in itself, the ground of the order we observe in the world must lie outside it. For this reason, we can infer the existence of God from the observation of the order of the world. It is important to note that the essence of the world, that is, the rational connection among the objects that compose it, in which each one determines the position of the other, is indeed necessary and involves an order similar to that of the mathematical series. The world is contingent only with respect to its actuality or existence, Wirklichkeit. And worlds different from this one are equally possible. We would say that the world is necessary and that consequently we don't need to look for a ground beyond it if space and time could not be filled in any other way. But if space and time can be filled in a way other than the one we know, there will be in the world no sufficient cause why the world is thus and not otherwise, and that cause will have to be sought outside it. Consequently, if the world is contingent, and contingency is defined by Wolff as that whose contrary can also be, that whose contrary is possible. So if the world is contingent, we shall be able to know from it that there is a God, a creator. For we have already proved that other worlds are possible. Do you want to?
Well, and I will read the recapitulation, the conclusion of our talk. Wolff's starting point has been the question of what we can know of God and how, if we consider his relation to the created world. More specifically, if we conceive that this creation has as its end the display of God's perfection. If this is the principal end of nature, then the world must be such that we can, in principle, recognize God's perfections from it. Within this line of reasoning, a problem arises. If the world were necessary, then we would not recognize from it that it has an external ground, that is, that God exists. That is, we could not recognize that God actually exists. God's line of argument is not to proceed by modus ponens because the antecedent is not true. That is, it is not true that the world is necessary. So we are not going to deal with a modus ponens in which the first premise says, if the world were necessary, then we would not recognize from it that it has an external ground, because as I said, the antecedent is not even true. In fact, in the metaphysics, Wolff has already explained that the world is not necessary in an absolute sense. Strictly speaking, along this line of argument, the only thing we could infer is that it is not impossible for us to recognize the requirement of an external ground of the world. What function does the analogy that we have explained have? What is the analogy and what are its limits? These are the three questions that have served as the guiding thread of our work, of this talk. The function of the analogy, we have argued, is to make intelligible the link between the antecedent and the consequent of the premise we have discussed, which I repeat says that if the world were necessary, we could not infer from it that God exists. The analogy appeals to a familiar, clear, and distinct subject matter, mathematical series. These are necessary numerical series in which each element is necessary as the order of all of them. Their ground is found in themselves, and for this reason, we do not need to go beyond them in order to look for it. The reference to mathematical series in order to illustrate a premise that does not concern mathematical series, but the relation between God and the world, rests on a likeness between the two cases. They are two orders in which the places are determined. The likeness, however, has a limit. The numerical series is absolutely necessary, whereas the world, as the series of the things that exist, is not. The world is necessary in its essence, but the fact that it exists is not. The existence of the world and of its elements is contingent, and other possible worlds are perfectly conceivable. This, which has been explained in the metaphysics, is crucial for the purposes of the book on the Absichten, since it allows him, Wolf, to face an objection against the principal end of the world, which would be to display the perfections of God. If the world were necessary, we could not even infer from it that God exists. And although this conditional claim makes sense, it does not constitute an acceptable objection precisely because its antecedent is false. This has been the line of argument we have developed in this paper. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was really, really great. I mean, thank you, Luciana. Thank you, Felipe. I think that's a marvelous work you did there. Like, that's a very curious notion that of the glory of God, that is the tribute we pay for his perfections, that are practical implications of that sort of conception and stuff. Well, now we have time for questions. If questions there are, like Professor Corey Dyke is with us today. I think his, if you want.
Yeah, can everybody hear me all right? Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you for that very interesting presentation. It agrees with, I mean, so I'm much more familiar with the Deutsche Metaphysik than the Deutsche Teleologie. But what you say agrees with much of what I understand of the discussion of God's existence in the Deutsche Metaphysik. So I had two questions. The first is kind of a quick terminological one. At the beginning of the talk, you spoke a couple of times about the world as mirroring God's perfection, and I wasn't sure if that was Wolf's language or yours. It struck me as something odd for Wolf to say that the world mirrors God's perfection, when I think, properly speaking, what Wolf intends is something like we can infer from the order of the world to God's perfection, but not that there's a kind of, relationship of mirroring between the two. So that's my first question, but maybe it's a quick answer on your part, so I can stop before I ask the second one.
Yeah, actually, it's Wolf. We are quoting him. The word is Spiegel.
Okay.
So yeah, he says that the word is the Hauptabsicht of the world is to reflect the perfections of God.
Okay.
And
Thank
the
you.
word is consistent.
Yeah, good. I'll have to have a look at that again. So the other question is maybe a bit more speculative. So I wonder if the parts of the analogy that Wolf accepts with the comparison between events in the world and the order of the series, whether the parts of the analogy that he accepts in that actually make his life more difficult. So the point is that fine, we can accept that the world is contingent, even if all events in the world are to some extent necessitated. But according to the analogy, it sounds like Wolf is reducing or identifying causal necessitation with logical or mathematical necessitation. right? So this amounts to a conception of causal relation that doesn't include ceteris paribus kind of conditions, certainly excludes anything like simple regularities, right? So this is a very strong notion of causation. And so I wonder if, Wolff's critic might say, well, fine, we can accept that the world itself isn't necessitated, but you've made a claim to something stronger than the simple hypothetical necessitation of events in the world, right? That ultimately, on the kind of deepest level of analysis, things in the world are as necessary as the order of the series, the mathematical series. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Dick, for your, did I pronounce your surname rightly? Dick or Dyke? Okay.
Either way, yeah, I tend to go with Dyke.
Okay. Yes, I mean, I agree with you that this idea of causation that he seems to accept, I mean, that Wolff actually accepts, is a little bit too strong. And for us, it has been really difficult to understand which is the difference between the necessity that we do find in the mathematical series and we do not find, according to Wolff, in the series of the object of the world. Because actually, yes, he seems to actually accept a very strong idea of foundation, as if there were, so to say, very well, there is so to say, a fixed structure of the world in which every element of it, I mean the actual world, this world, every element of it is completely determined in its existence in this structure. And its position in this structure is completely determined. The problem is that it seems that once you have this order in which the elements are disposed in this way, every element is necessary in this organization. But at the same time, when we have like a, so to say, logical idea of necessity in which something that is not necessary is something whose opposite is actually conceivable, is not contradictory, what we find is that we could actually conceive a world in which some elements of this world actually don't happen or don't exist. So this is why he cannot accept a strong idea of necessity in this world, because his idea of necessity is defined in a very logical, in some logical way, in which, as I said before, something is necessary if its opposite is contradictory or cannot be conceivable. And actually, something that is I mean, a different world is actually conceivable. Actually, a lot of infinite alternative worlds are conceivable. This is why this actual world is not necessary. It could be in another way. We could have another structure, a foundation, in which some or maybe every element of this world actually didn't exist or couldn't exist. This is as I understand the problem. But I agree with you that it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard to understand the very idea of necessity and the very idea of causality, and how the structure of the world in which everything is completely determined in some way, and by causality, actually determined through causality, how it is to be conceived. For me, it's not that easy. I mean, and in the case of the concept of necessity, I'm a Kantian, so I would distinguish between a logical sense of the necessity and, so to say, I don't know, ontological or metaphysical sense of necessity. I don't think he does. I mean, Wolff does. Maybe yes, but I didn't find it. This would be my answer. I don't know if you find it acceptable or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the more or less doctrinaire Wolffian response. The question is, I mean, to some extent, it seems to me that Wolff is saying something stronger here than he might have said in his earlier essays and treatments of causality, where he seems to be a bit more circumspect about characterizing the kind of necessity involved, leaving open the possibility of other things happening under similar circumstances. And so it seems to me that the analogy strengthens what he has said before about the causal relation. But yeah, what you say is exactly correct as far as what I take to be the kind of Wolffian line on this. But I think that there's a certain opponent of Wolff who might welcome the analogy and say that it's revealing about the kind of necessity ultimately that Wolff thinks of causality in terms of. Yeah.
Yes. I fully agree with you on this point. Yes.
We don't actually have any more questions in the chat, but I would like to make just a quick follow-up on Corey Dyke's point about mirroring God's perfections and stuff, right? I mean, I think it's around paragraph 1040 or 50 something in the German metaphysics, and like it plays a very substantial role in the Opus Metaphysicum, actually. Like this whole idea of like the interconnection between this tribute we pay to the ens perfectissimum is actually the Gloria Dei, in the sense of glory of God, which is the manifestation of God's perfections by, for instance, says that's actually a sort of influence from, also verbinden war ein bisschen abgehakt, oder?
Ja, ein bisschen, aber ich glaube, wir haben verstanden.
Okay. I mean, Jean Cole says, for instance, that it is a sort of influence from, I don't know, like Saint Bonaventure, for instance, like this whole Franciscan idea of mirroring God's perfections and so on. I tend to agree with him, but like that's a very, I think Clemens Schweiger said that there is a shift from how the way Wolff understands the whole concept of glory of God from the Habilitationsschrift on to the more like mature writings. And it's going to be published in the Akten of our first Wolff Congress 2024. Like there is, at first Wolff is influenced by a rather Reformed theologian perspective about the glorification of God, and then like he shifts from a more conservative, traditional understanding, which mirrors also like Aquinas' take on it, or even Bonaventure, as I said. And like the idea is that the whole world perfects itself, and in doing so, it glorifies God. And that's the whole mirroring thing. Like some necessarily that pious thing to do, in the sense that like you just, I mean, my connection is a bit off.
Yeah, I mean, I lost. Now I lost you completely.
Okay.
But before we were like listening to you.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point, and that would be my interpretation of it, is that the concept of the glory of God and then like the manifestation of God's perfections as a kind of mirroring is more important than most secondary literature tends to see the thing. And it's actually a very good example in the Deutsche Teleologie even. I think like that's there's a whole world we can explore, pun unintended, in the sense that like it's a work that mostly everyone who tends to do something with Wolff doesn't know that text, right? I mean, and I think that's a good contribution on your part to do so, like to explore. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, actually, it's like it's kind of the main point of the very first part of the text of the Absichten, to discuss precisely this Hauptabsicht der Welt, which would be like to express, to show, I don't know how to say that in English, but the glory or the perfections of God, no?
Yeah, I think Wolff uses manifestandi and illustrandi. In Latin.
In Latin.
Yeah. But that's like, as I said, the whole natural theology thing in Wolff's thought is somewhat, I mean, less researched, I think. Like, Coyle is probably like the reference to that point. But yeah, like Robert Theis researched a lot on that. And like, there's, many topics you can also derive from those considerations, I think.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we are Kantians, Felipe and me, so we approached this text because we wanted to understand or to discuss whether Kant in the Critique of Judgment was discussing with this text of Wolff in some points.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would say probably not, because even like Wolffins aren't actually that close to that particular text. But I mean, who knows, right? I mean, it's absolutely worth to have a look at it.
Yeah, I think it is.
Well, thank you very much. Muchas gracias. I think congrats. We'll have now. I think we'll have to shift web links, like because like Guillem's presentation is about to start. If you want to stay like in the background to do also a kind of debate then with video and stuff, the link.
Yes, thank you very much for the questions to both of you.
Thank you very much.
And for the attention.